I'd like to thank the members of the Academy for honoring my fellow nominees and myself. This means a lot to me, since it comes from a role in which I was directed by my father.
Hard moments are...
For decades, Anjelica Huston and Jack Nicholson were Hollywood's most fascinating enigma. A couple so magnetizing, so chaotic, and so iconic that even their silences spoke volumes. They weren't just stars. They were royalty of a different kingdom, one fueled by charisma, defiance, and cigarettes burned down to the filter during 3 a.m. arguments in Beverly Hills. But behind the glamorous photos and dazzling premieres was a love story written in heartbreak, betrayal, and buried pain. Huston, the daughter of director John Huston and a fiercely gifted actress in her own right, stood in the shadow of one of the most famous men in the world, Jack Nicholson, the devilish genius who seduced not only Hollywood, but nearly everyone in it. For 17 tumultuous years they danced in and out of love, surviving cheating scandals, public humiliation, and the slow erosion of trust. And yet, for decades, Anjelica stayed silent, dignified, poised, protecting not just Jack's myth, but her own memories of what they had. Until now. At 74, with the spotlight fading and reflection taking its place, Huston has begun to share what really happened behind closed doors. What she tolerated, what broke her, and what in the end was never fully healed. This is not just the story of Jack and Anjelica. It is the story of power, passion, and the emotional toll of loving a man the world never stopped applauding, even as he tore her apart. When Anjelica Huston met Jack Nicholson in 1973 at a party at his Mulholland Drive home, she was only 22. He was already Jack, a Hollywood bad boy on the brink of becoming a cinematic god. Fresh off his career-defining turn in 5 Easy Pieces, and just before Chinatown and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest would seal his legacy. Anjelica was elegant, sharp-witted, and entirely uninterested in becoming just another conquest. And maybe that's exactly why Jack fell for her. Their connection was immediate. He called her beautiful. She called him dangerous. Within weeks, they were inseparable, at least when Jack allowed it. From the very beginning, their relationship was defined by absence as much as togetherness. Huston was always waiting for Jack to call, for Jack to come home, for Jack to choose her over the chaos he constantly courted. Yet she stayed. He was like a planet, and I was just trying not to get burned in the orbit, she once wrote. Jack's world was intoxicating. He threw wild parties, kept strange hours, and could be both the most charming man in the room and the cruelest without changing expression. And for years, Anjelica tried to find stability within that storm. She believed, maybe naively, that she could be the one to tame him. Not because he needed her to, but because love, she thought, meant holding on when it was hardest. She overlooked the flirting, the late nights, the rumors of affairs. She gave him her youth, her loyalty, and the benefit of the doubt, time and again. But behind the grace was a woman quietly unraveling. Anjelica had come from a dynasty that taught her to be resilient, but nothing prepared her for the emotional warfare of being in love with Jack Nicholson. He was loyal to no one, yet expected absolute devotion. Huston would later say that her years with Jack were filled with humiliations small and large, acts of emotional negligence, gaslighting, and a steady drip of betrayals disguised as eccentricity. She would attend parties where other women flirted with him in front of her, and Jack, ever the performer, played into it. He dismissed her jealousy as insecurity. When she found suspicious phone numbers or caught him in lies, he responded with jokes, charm, or silence. And still she stayed. Why? Because in between the chaos were moments of tenderness that convinced her it wasn't all for nothing. Jack could be gentle. He could be thoughtful. And he always came back, until one day he didn't. Their relationship became a cycle. Love, betrayal, apology, repeat. When Anjelica tried to leave, Jack would pull her back in with grand declarations. He told her no one understood him like she did. He said she was the only woman he truly loved, and maybe, in his own broken way, he meant it. But love, Anjelica would later realize, is not just about passion. It's about presence. And Jack, for all his grandiosity, was rarely truly present. Her friends begged her to walk away. Hollywood whispered that she was wasting her best years. But Anjelica was not just in love. She was invested in the fantasy of what Jack could become. It would take years before she realized that the man she hoped Jack would be was never coming. Still, in the earliest years, there was hope. There was the dream that Jack Nicholson, the man who had the world at his feet, might someday make room in that world for her. If the early years of Anjelica Huston's relationship with Jack Nicholson were marked by longing, the later years were defined by quiet devastation. For nearly 2 decades, she remained in his orbit, sometimes as a partner, sometimes as a ghost he wouldn't quite release. Jack, with his signature grin and unpredictable spirit, floated in and out of her life with the kind of casual inconsistency that could only come from someone who believed he'd always be forgiven. And for a long time he was. But everything changed in 1989, when Huston discovered that Jack had fathered a child with another woman. That woman was Rebecca Broussard, an actress in her 20s, and her relationship with Nicholson had not only overlapped with Anjelica's, but was ongoing. Huston found out about the betrayal the way the public did, through the tabloids. But what made it worse wasn't just the affair. It was the baby. A child meant permanence. A child meant a future that didn't include her. Jack had crossed a line that could not be walked back. After 17 years of waiting, forgiving, and hoping, Anjelica was finally forced to confront the reality she had avoided for so long. Jack had never been hers to keep. What followed was a reckoning. For someone who had endured Jack's flings and disappearances with a stoicism admired and pitied by her peers, this final betrayal struck with a different weight. Huston described the moment as soul-crushing, not because she didn't expect it, but because she had given so much of her life to a man who, in the end, gave his future to someone else. Still, in true Huston fashion, she didn't explode publicly. There were no screaming interviews or scorned headlines. Instead, she packed her dignity, left the house they shared, and disappeared from his life with the kind of silence that cuts deeper than words. Years later, she would write about the pain in her memoir, revealing that Jack didn't even call to apologize. Instead, he sent a bunch of flowers, not roses, not a heartfelt letter, just flowers, as if a bouquet could wash away years of broken promises. Their relationship ended not with a final fight, but with a whimper, a slow fading out of a love story that had once seemed unbreakable. Huston was 38 when it happened, an age when many actresses in Hollywood were already being pushed aside. She had sacrificed years of her prime to a man who couldn't even offer her the decency of honesty. And yet, in the wreckage, she found herself. The end of her relationship with Nicholson marked the beginning of something else entirely, a rebirth. Freed from his shadow, she began to carve out her own path, not as Jack's muse, but as Anjelica Huston, the formidable actress, the director, the survivor. Her performances became richer, her choices bolder, her voice louder. No longer waiting for Jack to validate her existence, she finally stepped into her own. But the scars remained. In later interviews, Huston spoke about Nicholson with a mixture of admiration and lingering pain. She never vilified him. She didn't need to. The truth was in the details. The nights he didn't come home, the lies she had to swallow, the child he fathered with someone else. "He was my big love," she once said. And maybe that's what made it so tragic. Because sometimes your big love isn't your true love. It's the one that teaches you the most painful lessons. And for Anjelica, the lesson was clear. Charisma isn't character. And love, no matter how intoxicating, cannot survive in the absence of respect. When Anjelica Huston walked away from Jack Nicholson, she wasn't just ending a love affair, she was reclaiming her identity. For too long, the public had seen her as a satellite orbiting Jack's chaotic brilliance, the elegant woman standing just behind the man who always stole the spotlight. But now, for the first time, she was center stage, and the transformation was nothing short of breathtaking. The years that followed were some of her most defining. In 1990, just 1 year after the affair and child that ended everything, she gave a powerhouse performance in The Grifters, earning an Academy Award nomination and widespread acclaim. It was as though something inside her had been unlocked. She was no longer acting through pain, she was acting with power. The critics saw it, and so did the world. This wasn't Nicholson's ex. This was Anjelica Huston, a force in her own right. And behind the scenes, she was finally allowing herself to heal. She wrote, she directed, and she spoke out in ways she never had before. No longer in Jack's shadow, Anjelica began to reflect publicly on the emotional toll of their years together. In her memoir, Watch Me, she didn't aim to destroy Jack. She aimed to understand him, and in doing so, finally understand herself. She described their time together as both magical and maddening, a constant emotional tug-of-war between love and self-preservation. But what stood out most was her clarity. She no longer romanticized the chaos. She didn't pretend it hadn't hurt, and she didn't apologize for staying as long as she did. I loved him, she wrote simply. And sometimes love clouds your vision. It's only when you step away that you see what you were missing: peace, respect, and space to become your fullest self. And while Jack Nicholson never publicly addressed the end of their relationship in depth, his actions, or lack thereof, spoke volumes. He continued living as Jack always had, larger than life, surrounded by women, elusive, unpredictable. But as the years passed, the cracks began to show. His once dominant presence began to retreat. Fewer film roles, fewer public appearances. In contrast, Anjelica's voice only grew stronger.
She became a respected elder in the industry, outspoken, wise, and fiercely unapologetic.
She used her platform not just to tell her story, but to advocate for women's rights, age inclusion in Hollywood, and emotional accountability. Things that had been denied to her for far too long. Still, the ghost of Jack Nicholson lingered. Even now, when Huston sits for interviews, the subject of Jack inevitably comes up. And though she answers with grace, there's often a pause, just a flicker, where you can tell the wound, though healed, left a scar. She admits there were beautiful moments, great laughter and a profound bond, but she also admits she stayed too long, that the man who claimed to love her never truly showed up in the way that mattered. And for a woman raised in a world where legacy and loyalty were everything, letting go of that illusion was its own quiet revolution. If you've been moved by this rare, emotional glimpse into the life of a woman the world thought it already knew, please like, subscribe, and comment below. Your support helps us bring you more untold Hollywood stories, stories that are messy, human, and unforgettable. Now at 74, Anjelica Huston looks back not with bitterness, but with an honesty that's both rare and revelatory in Hollywood. Her voice no longer trembles when she speaks of Jack Nicholson. It's measured, calm, and anchored in wisdom. Time, she says, has a way of sanding down even the sharpest pain, but the memories never disappear. And when she talks about Jack, she doesn't speak like a woman who lost everything. She speaks like a woman who survived everything, and that distinction matters. In interviews and essays, she no longer protects the myth of Jack. Instead, she tells the truth, not to shame him, but to finally unburden herself of the weight she carried for too long. She admits that she loved him madly, foolishly, deeply, but she also admits that she confused chaos with passion and silence with strength. Jack had an energy that could fill a room, she once said. But sometimes when he left, that room would feel like a crater. That crater is what she spent years trying to crawl out of. And she did. What she reveals now is not just the story of a love affair gone wrong, but the story of what happens when a woman finally chooses herself over the idea of a man who never fully chose her. For years she was cast as the loyal girlfriend, the tragic beauty behind the genius. But that narrative has shifted. Now she's the storyteller, the director, the survivor who stepped away from the fire and came back stronger. And as she speaks, she gives voice to a generation of women who were told that enduring pain was a form of love. Her words hit differently now, in a post-Me Too world, where silence is no longer the price of dignity. Her decision to speak out, decades after the fact, isn't about revenge. It's about reclamation, of her story, of her power, of her life. As for Jack Nicholson, his legacy remains complicated. Revered for his talent, but increasingly shadowed by the emotional trail he left behind. Anjelica doesn't deny his brilliance. She even smiles sometimes when his name comes up. There is affection there still, but it is laced with a distance that speaks volumes. She doesn't mourn what could have been anymore, because what could have been is not what was. And in that gap she has found peace. Some people are meant to be loved, she once said, but not kept. That single sentence may be the most truthful thing ever said about Jack Nicholson. And it may also be the secret to understanding why, after all these years, Anjelica Huston finally chose to reveal what really happened. Her story is not one of defeat, but of awakening. Of a woman who gave her heart to a man the world couldn't stop clapping for, and then found the courage to walk away when the applause drowned out her own voice. At 74, Anjelica Huston isn't just reflecting. She's redefining her story, no longer as the lover left behind, but as the woman who endured, transformed, and emerged whole. Her truth isn't filtered through nostalgia or revenge. It's told through clarity, through lived experience, through the kind of emotional honesty that only comes when you stop needing the world to agree with your pain. And maybe that's what makes her story so powerful. It reminds us that behind every great man's legacy is a woman who lived the untold half of that legend. And when she finally speaks, we realize whose story it always truly was.